Welcome to Binge True Crime, Despots and Dictators. What if the traits of a serial killer were hidden behind the mask of a political leader? Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq, wasn't just a head of state. He wielded power with the brutality of a killer on a massive scale. From state-sanctioned violence to chemical attacks on civilians, his actions set him apart in history. How does a leader cross the line from ruling a nation to orchestrating mass murder? Discover 5 chilling facts that reveal the dark truth behind Saddam Hussein's regime. Will you uncover the parallels between power and pure evil? Here are 5 unique facts about Saddam Hussein that distinguish him from other despots and dictators. Number 1. Political leadership. Saddam Hussein's political leadership was marked by an authoritarian grip on Iraq, beginning when he assumed the presidency in 1979 and ending with his ousting in 2003. His regime, characterized by its ruthless suppression of opposition, strategic use of state machinery, and significant impact on both domestic and international stages. Saddam rose to power through the ranks of the Ba'ath Party, which espoused Arab nationalism and socialism. In 1979, he became president of Iraq after a swift coup within the party. His consolidation of power was immediate and brutal. He purged rivals and dissenters through fear, repression, and executions, establishing a regime that was fiercely loyal to him. Under Saddam's leadership, Iraq became a tightly controlled state with extensive surveillance and a formidable security apparatus. The Mukhabarat, Iraq's intelligence agency, played a crucial role in maintaining his rule, using torture, disappearances, and executions to silence any form of opposition. Saddam's personality cult was pervasive, with his images and statues omnipresent throughout Iraq, reinforcing his grip on power. Saddam's domestic policies were a mix of modernization efforts and brutal repression. He invested in infrastructure, education, and healthcare, aiming to modernize Iraq and increase its regional influence. However, these efforts were overshadowed by his violent campaigns against perceived enemies. The most notorious was the Anfal against the Kurdish population in the late 1980s, which involved the use of chemical weapons and resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands. On the international stage, Saddam's leadership was equally tumultuous. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, was a devastating conflict that drained resources and inflicted massive casualties. In 1990, Saddam's decision to invade Kuwait led to the Gulf War, bringing international condemnation and a crushing military defeat by a US-led coalition. Despite these setbacks, Saddam managed to maintain power through the 1990s, albeit under severe international sanctions that crippled Iraq's economy. Saddam's rule came to an abrupt end in 2003 when a US-led invasion toppled his regime. He was captured, tried, and executed in 2006 for crimes against humanity. Number 2. State-sanctioned violence. Saddam Hussein's regime, which ruled Iraq from 1979 to 2003, was infamous for its state-sanctioned violence. The brutality and repression during his rule were systemic. Both were often carried out by the state's military and security forces as part of broader political strategies aimed at consolidating power, suppressing dissent, and doing ethnic cleansing. From the onset of his presidency, Saddam established an authoritarian regime characterized by a ruthless elimination of political rivals. In 1979, shortly after assuming power, he conducted a dramatic purge within the Ba'ath Party, wherein dozens of party members were executed in a public show of force. This set the tone for his reign, demonstrating that dissent would be met with lethal force. The state apparatus under Saddam was meticulously structured to maintain control and instill fear. The Mukhabarat, Iraq's intelligence agency, along with other security forces, played a pivotal role in surveilling the population, detaining, torturing, and executing perceived enemies of the state. These acts of violence were not random, but calculated efforts to silence opposition and deter any challenges to Saddam's authority. One of the most horrific examples of state-sanctioned violence was the Anfal campaign against the Kurdish population in the late 1980s. This campaign, orchestrated by Saddam's cousin Ali Hassan al-Majid, also known as Chemical Ali, aimed to quell Kurdish resistance in northern Iraq. It included mass executions, destruction of villages, and the use of chemical weapons, most notably in the town of Halabja in 1988, where thousands of civilians were killed. This act of genocide was part of a broader strategy to eliminate any threats to Saddam's regime. The repression extended beyond ethnic groups to any political opposition. The Shia population in southern Iraq faced brutal crackdowns, especially after uprisings following the Gulf War in 1991. Saddam's forces employed mass arrests, executions, and widespread destruction to suppress these rebellions. Throughout his rule, Saddam utilized propaganda and a cult of personality to legitimize his actions. State-controlled media depicted him as a strong paternal figure defending Iraq against internal and external enemies. This narrative was used to justify the extensive violence perpetrated by the regime. Saddam Hussein's use of state-sanctioned violence was a central element of his strategy to maintain power. Thank you for taking time to watch our podcast and channel. If you like what you see and hear, please like and subscribe to my channel. It is very important and meaningful for me. Number 3. Use of chemical weapons. Saddam Hussein's regime is notorious for its use of chemical weapons, most infamously during the Halabja chemical attack in 1988. This egregious act of state-sanctioned violence starkly contrasts the methods employed by serial killers who typically act independently and on a smaller scale. Instead, Saddam's use of chemical weapons was a calculated move within broader political and military strategies. The Anfal campaign, launched in the late 1980s, was a systematic effort by Saddam's government to quash Kurdish resistance in northern Iraq. This campaign, led by Saddam's cousin Ali Hassan al-Majid, involved the widespread destruction of Kurdish villages, mass deportations, and large-scale killings. The use of chemical weapons epitomized the regime's brutal approach to any opposition. The most infamous incident occurred on March 16, 1988, in the Kurdish town of Halabja. In response to Kurdish support for Iranian forces during the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam's regime unleashed a devastating chemical attack on Halabja. Iraqi aircraft dropped bombs containing a lethal mix of mustard gas and nerve agents like sarin and VX. The attack killed an estimated 5,000 civilians, mostly women and children, and injured thousands more. Survivors suffered long-term health effects, including chronic respiratory issues, cancer, and birth defects. The Halabja attack was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader strategy that saw chemical weapons used in multiple Kurdish areas. These attacks served dual purposes: eliminate Kurdish insurgents and terrorize the Kurdish population into submission. The international community was horrified, but immediate responses were limited, partly due to geopolitical complexities of the time. Saddam's use of chemical weapons was a blatant violation of international law, specifically the Geneva Protocol, which Iraq had ratified. Despite this, the regime continued its policies of repression and violence until its downfall in 2003. The legacy of these attacks left deep scars in Iraqi Kurdistan, contributing to ongoing tensions and demands for justice and autonomy. The deployment of chemical weapons by Saddam's regime underscores the extreme measures he employed to maintain power and suppress dissent. It remains a grim reminder of the capacity for state-led violence to inflict mass suffering and lasting trauma, far surpassing the impact of individual acts of violence. Number 4. International conflicts. Saddam Hussein's tenure as president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003 was marked by significant international conflicts with profound and lasting impacts on the region and the world. Two of the most notable conflicts were the Iran-Iraq War and the invasion of Kuwait, both driven by Saddam's political and territorial ambitions. The Iran-Iraq War, lasting from 1980 to 1988, was one of the longest and most devastating conflicts of the 20th century. Saddam Hussein initiated the war, largely motivated by fears of the Iranian Revolution spreading into Iraq and destabilizing his regime. Additionally, he aimed to assert Iraqi dominance over the Shatt al-Arab waterway, a strategic channel crucial for oil exports. The conflict quickly escalated into a brutal war of attrition, with both sides employing trench warfare, human wave attacks, and chemical weapons. The war resulted in an estimated 1 million casualties, widespread destruction, and economic devastation for both nations. Despite the immense loss of life and resources, the war ended in a stalemate, with neither side achieving decisive gains. In 1990, Saddam Hussein's ambitions led to another major conflict, the invasion of Kuwait. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces swiftly occupied Kuwait, claiming it as Iraq's 19th province. Saddam's motives were multifaceted. He sought to resolve Iraq's severe economic problems post-Iran-Iraq War by acquiring Kuwait's vast oil reserves and enhancing Iraq's strategic power in the region. The invasion was met with international condemnation and led to the formation of a US-led coalition to liberate Kuwait. The Gulf War, also known as Operation Desert Storm, commenced in January 1991. The coalition forces launched a massive aerial bombardment, followed by a swift ground assault. This liberated Kuwait in just 42 days. The conflict inflicted severe damage on Iraq's infrastructure and military capabilities, resulting in tens of thousands of Iraqi casualties. The war also led to harsh economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations, further crippling Iraq's economy and exacerbating the suffering of its people. These international conflicts underscored Saddam Hussein's aggressive and expansionist policies. His actions were driven by a desire to solidify Iraq's regional dominance and secure economic resources, but they ultimately led to widespread devastation, loss of life, and long-term instability in the region. Number 5. Propaganda and cult personality. Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003, meticulously crafted and maintained a powerful cult of personality. He leveraged extensive propaganda to solidify his control and present himself as a heroic and paternal figure to the Iraqi people. This approach is in stark contrast to serial killers who typically seek to avoid detection and operate in secrecy. From the moment he assumed power, Saddam Hussein embarked on a systematic campaign to elevate his image to near-mythical status. State-controlled media played a crucial role, portraying him as the indispensable leader and protector of Iraq. His image was omnipresent. Portraits, statues, and murals of Saddam adorned public spaces, government buildings, schools, and even private homes. This visual saturation was designed to ensure that his presence was felt in every aspect of daily life. The propaganda machine depicted Saddam as a multifaceted hero. He was shown as a military strategist, leading Iraq to victory and defending its sovereignty. During the Iran-Iraq War, state media highlighted his role as a fearless leader, safeguarding Iraq from Iranian aggression. Even in defeat, such as after the Gulf War, propaganda portrayed him as a resilient and steadfast figure, standing firm against foreign adversaries. Saddam also cultivated his image as a benevolent father figure, concerned with the welfare of his people. Government propaganda showcased his visits to schools, hospitals, and factories, where he was often seen engaging with ordinary Iraqis, listening to their concerns and providing solutions. These carefully staged events aimed to humanize Saddam and reinforce the perception of his paternal care. Education and culture were also harnessed to perpetuate Saddam's cult of personality. School curricula were modified to include his biography and achievements, presenting him as an exemplar of leadership and patriotism. Literature, poetry, and art were commissioned to glorify his deeds and celebrate his vision for Iraq. Under Saddam's leadership, the Ba'ath Party used coercion and incentives to ensure loyalty and suppress dissent. Membership in the party was often a prerequisite for professional advancement, and displays of loyalty to Saddam were rewarded. Conversely, any criticism or opposition was met with severe punishment, including imprisonment, torture, and execution. Saddam Hussein's cult of personality was a sophisticated blend of propaganda, coercion, and myth-making. It sought to create an unassailable image of a heroic, paternal leader essential to Iraq's identity and survival. This manipulation of public perception was central to his strategy for maintaining power. Thank you for taking time to watch our podcast and channel. If you like what you see and hear, please like and subscribe to my channel. It is very important and meaningful for me.